Hello, hello.
People, hello.
How's everyone
New
doing
Year.
today? Yeah, happy New Year, happy new mirrorless Monday. How are you doing, Jason?
I am doing fine, and I guess we've disappointed maybe three people because we still have yet to spring for a theme. But we do have
I
the
know.
waiting room music, so
we do.
we've
And
got that
honestly,
going for us.
yeah, and I hope everyone's doing all right. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I hope you guys maybe are off and enjoying yourself here. But this live stream is essentially a love letter to anyone who's recently purchased a new camera, or if you just need a refresher and get started for the new year. So I'm hoping that this live stream will be good. And if you guys have any questions, please be as vocal as you need to on the chat. Other than that, how are you doing, Jason?
I am doing good. I think like a good chunk of the population out there, happy to have power, happy to be warm.
Yep.
Still waiting on some of my to me from me Sony presents this year. So, like many people chomping at the bits, if you've gotten your camera for the first time, hopefully tonight, Robbie and I will be able to help you with any questions you have and give you a good jump start on just understanding everything that's in the Sony Alpha universe.
Absolutely. And I see Pete Torres saying hi. And if you guys have anything, if you guys want to let us know what cameras you're using, I see Kevin here said, "Ooh, love the Sony themed orange shirt, Robbie. Thank you. I got lucky on this sweater. I saw it on sale at the Gap."
He did. And you know what? That's a good call out there, Kevin. Even as Robbie and I were starting this up, I'm here in just a regular like Sony Alpha hoodie. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna wear some of the badging. But Robbie went all out. He's got the color right there.
It has pockets. That's what I'm excited about. Even though there's no hoodie. And I'm like, nice.
Kevin and I can't be wrong. It's a beautiful color.
Anyway, let's see. We got a comment from June here. Hi, Jason Robbie. I have a Sony A9 II. Awesome. Great camera. I need to update the software. Can you let me know? Yeah, we'll definitely get into the topic in terms of updating the firmware and what to expect. We also have a lot of submitted questions as well that we'll also try to touch on. So if you, we're going to get to those questions as well. But again, if you guys have any questions, we're going to be more than happy to answer that here. Rick Wise, hi guys, I just got a Sony A7R5, perfect. And we also have, hi, thank you very much this video. I'm from CR using an A7 III, awesome. And I also have an A7 IV connected over here, so we could also show you anything that's going on for the camera. So if there's any settings we need to do, I could even give you some kind of tips and tricks in terms of what to do about that as well. So it should be good. And let's see. I
We've
converted
got all kinds of good stuff here.
Oh yeah, we got June who also has an A7 converted to full spectrum. That's so awesome. I definitely want to do that for the A7S III. I definitely want to dabble into infrared photography just because it's such a different type of photography. But yeah, if you guys have any comments, let us know too if the audio is too loud or too low. And then we'll try to adjust that. It's been a while since we've done a live stream, so we're very happy to be getting back into it. And thank you, Adorama, for hosting this live stream as well. You guys are an amazing store, and if you guys want to, shop and support your camera stores, definitely do that and support Adorama because their staff is extremely knowledgeable, and I enjoy visiting there any chance that I get. All right. So I'm gonna get started. Jason, how does that sound?
I think that is a good idea. So we put it in the chat, everyone. You could throw in some questions in there. Robbie and I would love to answer them. And thank you to everyone who submitted their questions ahead of time. Just so you know, Robbie and I have a nice little list here of all the questions that have come in. So if we don't shout you out by name, it's just because several people all had the same question. And a lot of it will be answered during Robbie's presentation as well. But we'll still stick around at the end for anything we may have missed.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you guys didn't notice, I am using the ECM S1 mic right now. It's connected to my Sony A7C II, and it's just being connected just through USB to live stream, which is pretty cool. What are you using, Jason?
I am not using the ECM S1. But my audio is doing okay. I still have these wonderful Sony headphones, though.
It's true.
I'm old school. Yes,
Classic.
you have a nice pair there, too. Can't go wrong when
Yeah.
you're cabled in.
Yeah, so if you're liking the sound, Sony just came out with this nice microphone, the ECM S1, which is a mic. I have it connected over here with a boom arm and a tripod head, just so I could get the angle and the weight because it's so light. And then they also came out with these lovely little pocketable microphones as well that connects just through USB or through the hot shoe.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. Let's see. Anastasia said, will this be recorded so we can go back to review it again? Absolutely, yes. We did have that pending, so just fast forward 5 minutes and then you'll get back into the live stream here. Cool. All right, so we're going to get started and we're going to get the slideshow here. Just give me one moment.
Yes, big transition. Nothing can go wrong here.
Nothing could go wrong. All right, here. All right, so we're going to be going back to our 101s here, and we're going to be running through everything pretty much that we need. If you guys don't know, I am Robbie Bulilan, and I am a Sony imaging specialist. So anyone who has questions for, anything Sony related, I'm more than happy to answer it. And there's a lot of facets. It's really great for this job that I have because I get to hear all the questions and kind of react quicker and seeing what everyone's going through. But I've been shooting since, I started with the A300, so I was really happy to see that as the title picture there that Akiva made for us. And so that was my first camera that I ever started with, and it was A mount. Sony started by absorbing Minolta, and we started with DSLRs, and now it's been 10 years since we've had full frame mirrorless cameras, which is exceptional, and I'm really happy that we've converted that way and really progressed forwards towards it, right? But yeah, that's a little bit about me. And Jason himself is also a Sony imaging specialist, and that's why it's really great to have him here with us during the live stream. That way he could also answer any of the questions through the chat while I'm going through my my presentation. All right, so one of the things I want to talk about is resources. Like the alphauniverse.com is a really great resource for you to see other artisans and see their work, what's in their camera bag. And it's also a great place to actually see if your camera's firmware is up to date, right? So in one of the sections there, you're gonna be able to see the firmware section, and you can see if your camera's up to date. Or you could just shoot us a DM through our Instagram at robbiebulilan.arw, and I believe Jason is, I think Jason, it's there when we're talking heads, so it'll come back up and you'll see it in the bottom over here. Cool. Another great resource here is esupport.sony.com US, and that's where you could find all your manuals and firmware upgrades, as well as Q&As, help guides, and any of that kind of information. And then I highly suggest registering your products if you did just purchase your camera. That way, whenever there is something that's going on, it just processes a lot faster because you don't need to submit it anymore. It's already in their database. All right, so the A7 IV, and let's see here. Peter said your slides are out of focus. Hopefully it clears up. You might need to adjust your quality there for the live stream. But that should resolve it. Let me know if that isn't the case. But yeah, back to the menu versions. We have a few different cameras now. We're up to the 3rd generation, but previously we had menu version 1 and menu version 2, and now we're finally on menu version 3, which it's my personal favorite right now. I haven't updated the slide yet because obviously the A9 III is on that list, as well as the A7R5, but we're going to be running most of the class through the menu version 3, just because that's pretty much, it's been around for a while now, maybe a few years, so I'm hoping that the majority of you guys are using menu version 3. If not, we could run you through it, and hopefully that'll answer some of the things. But a few things that I do like is that it's a lot more seamless. You're going through different tabs and everything else, so what I like is if you have anything in your camera you want to change, maybe, and here I could show you guys the menu real quick. Here in the menu, you could actually go through and see that shooting is just about shooting. So if you need to set it on USB streaming or silent shutter, mechanical, it's all going to be here. Then anything that has to do with light or color, it's going to be in your exposure. And then your autofocusing is going to be here, so subject detection. reviewing, and your like anything that has to do with connection, and the overall customization of the camera is going to be in your toolbox. So that's one of the nice things over here. Let's see, Peter Fleischman also said, can you please correct the focus? I can't read your slides. Jason, do you want to check that real quick to see?
Yeah, I'm going to double check on some of these. Let us take a look here. It could be based on how everyone is looking at it. Some of these slides do have some small print, so I'll be putting up URLs so people, if you want, you can link on your pages as well.
Okay, perfect. So JH2007 and June also said it's perfect for them. So hopefully when this replays, you could review it in the full 1080p. And so you're probably going to be fine if you can't see any of the resolutions. I'm just happy to hear that everyone else is seeing that it's in perfect resolution. All right, cool. So we're going to move forward. And one of the most basic things that is within every camera is going to be your exposure triangle, right? So this is definitely one of the things that it took me a while to understand and kind of really process the pictures, because knowing your exposure triangle kind of prepares you in terms of what settings you need to do to get the shot that you're imagining in your head, right? If you want something with a blurry background, then you got to focus on not just your aperture, well, your lens and your aperture is going to have a major effect on that as well. But then you need to set up your shutter speed for anything with fast action. And then you have to go through your sacrifices with ISO if you need to raise your ISO or if you're in a studio setting, right? But yeah, so let's move forward. And the first thing that I want to do is focus towards shutter speed, right? And so for me, well, not for me, but theoretically, the more light that you allow into the camera it means that you're slowing down the shutter speed, right? So one of the things about the shutter speed when you're looking at it through the viewfinder is that it's showing you, and I could show you in the camera here, right over here to the bottom left, it says 1/400th of a second, right? If I set this all for manual, let me see if I could do that here. Manual, get out of that. And if I increase the shutter speed, oh, I think I have it set. Give me 1 second, guys, because it's currently set. Not that one, right. Live view display. There you go. There you go. So here, if I allow more light, then it'll show like more. It's showing more light because I'm reducing the exposure time, right? And it's showing a fraction. So the main thing about this is that what is it referring to for that fraction? So that fraction is in reference to 1 second, right? So 1/60th of a second is going to be a larger portion of light. But one thing that you should understand is that it means that you're capturing less time, but you're allowing more light into it. So having a balance for that is going to be important, right? So that fraction 1/60th, you're getting less light instead of 1 whole second, and so on. So something like 1/2000 of a second is going to be a lot less light, but you're able to stop time essentially, right? So one of the best examples for this is this shutter, this exposure here, right? So this was taken at 1/30th of a second, but I was panning left and right with the bicyclist here, so I was able to capture something in focus because they didn't move throughout the 1/60th of a second. So I was able to capture the motion of the wheels and everything else around us, right? So that's where I used that situation to 1/60th of a second to kind of slow down or show motion. And that's one of the benefits of using the slower shutter speeds. Another benefit is for people staying still. Right now I'm set for 1/60th of a second, and now I'm fairly sharp. So if someone is able to pose for you, then the exposure is going to be perfectly fine, and you could set your ISOs to be lower, right? And the other benefit for 1/1000 of a second or a faster shutter speed, this was taken at 1/8000 of a second, and this is where every single water droplet was pretty much caught, and there was no motion at all. It pretty much stopped time. But the sacrifice there is that you have a lot less light, right? So the main thing here is that we're gonna have to make some sacrifices here. So now I'm at like say 1/1000 of a second. And if I increase my ISO, it's able to kind of bring back some of the light, but the sacrifice really is that I am sacrificing image quality because I'm raising the ISO, but at least I get the shot that I need. So any fast-paced movement, event photography, I typically will be around 1/250th at the lowest, because I'm trying to capture kind of candid photographs where it's more snapshot and more natural. I'm not telling them to pose. That way, most of the time, no one's going to be, running back and forth where you need a crazy high shutter speed. But for me, the baseline for kind of candid photography, I'll be at 1/250th of a second. All right. So that's shutter speed. If you guys have any questions there, Jason will let me know, and I'll try to keep my eye on it. All right. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is aperture. Aperture has to do with the amount of light that's going through the camera. It's how much light is being absorbed into it, right? So essentially we're changing, it not only affects your amount of light going through, but it's also changing your depth of field. Right now I'm at f1.2, but if I go to f8 or something like that, you're gonna see how dirty my apartment is, because now the background, you're starting to see more things in focus. You're probably seeing the mic in focus as well. Now I'm out of f1.2. This is f3.5. This is f8, and now you could definitely see the doorknob over there is definitely more in focus. So it allows
some nice lenses back there.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, hold on. I probably have to go to full me. But yeah, here's f8 over here, and you can see that that is more in focus. But if I bring it up to f1.2, there you go.
Gotta love those tangible aperture rings that we have on those lenses again.
Yeah, so now everything is more shallow, and it's a pretty good way to kind of isolate the subject and also allow more light. So it's kind of win-win depending on the situation, right? If you're looking for something where you have a group and everyone's kind of spaced between, in front, behind, then you kind of need to be at a higher f-stop, maybe like f8, f5.6, just so more people are in focus. So just be mindful of that when you're looking through it. And yeah, I see a comment
and somewhat
here.
of a relevance. I was gonna bring up Gary's question here.
What's up?
Of course, Kevin, wonderful shout out there. Gave you the emoticon. We all want to experience the 80,000th of a second on the new A9 III. Robbie and I have got to play with it right now, and well, there'll be a whole live stream of Sony trying to chase us down across the country, because we don't want to have to give it back if it ever falls in our hands again. But we have from Gary a very popular question here. How does a lower megapixel camera do better in low light, high speed sports situations? If you buy a Sony a6700, which is an APS-C, with a Sony to 7200 f2.8 lens, which is usually a full frame lens, are you doing a disservice in a low light shooting?
Yeah,
And
well,
in some cases, it's situational. I mean, there's no true right or wrong in this case. If we want to be lens snobs about this, Robbie and I could say you're gaining the focal length with that 70 to 200 on there, but you are losing some elements of the light gathering in the glass because it's going to a smaller target than it was designed for. But in some cases, you just basically created a 300 millimeter lens on the A6700.
Right.
There are many ways to go about it in this case. I can't really say that, because every situation is going to be different when it comes to the lighting available. It could be something like there's a difference between a volleyball player about to spike and a volleyball player just standing there. So some of this will affect your speed, and obviously you can capture a little bit better with some lower resolution cameras. But the one that Kevin just alerted to, the A9 III is at 24 megapixels. It's a global shutter. It kind of blows out of the water the whole concept of how long to capture. But 24 megapixels there, a stack sensor like the A9 II, A9 Mark I, or the Alpha one, which is 50 megapixels with stack sensors, those will capture high speed and do really well as far as the noise. So there is no true answer to your question, but there are many options available.
Yeah, exactly. I would say, right, with the modern cameras today, if you're shooting with the A7S III in comparison to the A7R5, it comes down to what resolution you need your output to be. If the let's say the doesn't need really high resolution, they're printing it on low quality paper anyway, then I honestly, or even for newspapers or like online, and you're not needing to print it, then the A7S III is great because you could push ISO. You just need to make sure that it's not electronic shutter, because I mean, if you're using electronic shutter, depending on the lighting, there's a lot of things to consider as well. And again, like as Jason said, if you need a crop, then that's when the A7R5, the A1 come handy, right? The A9 III, you're not going to get any banding at all. And the A1 barely, you know, in comparison to the A7 IV or the A7S III, it's very minimal for you to see banding, but the A9 III takes it away completely, obviously through global shutter. So it comes down to your need, and if you really need to push ISOs up to, and it's very subjective as far as what ISO is needed, right? But I am going to cover ISO really shortly, so I hope that we'll be able to kind of go over that and kind of expand on that for you. Cool.
Yeah, and the ISOs, when Robbie brings it up, it'll play it out. And Gary, just the last part of your question there, in the right situation, much like Robbie just said with like a newspaper and how it's coming out, A7 IV could do fine in a crop mode, but you're losing significant megapixels. You're going from 33 into the teens. So it's just a matter of your resolution required at the end.
Yeah, and if you really don't crop, and that's going to be the biggest ones. If you don't crop, then perfect. Also, I also wanted to give a guideline in terms of the legend here. On the bottom left over here, let me see if I can bring my mouse. That means there's going to be less light available. Can you see? I think that you can see my mouse here. Yeah, minus is going to be less light, plus it's going to be more light. But yeah, so if you needed to get a better group shot, then I would suggest going to f4. You do sacrifice the amount of light going through, but you will be able to kind of expand more in terms of who's in focus and everyone else. Because in the last shot here, I wasn't able to get everyone in focus, and this one I was able to by going up to f5.6 instead of f2.8 for this wedding shot. Cool. Next, I want to talk about ISO. And this is exactly what we were just talking about, Jason. So one of the main things here is that the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it will be to light. And every camera is not equal. And there's a lot of things that go along with it. As we said earlier, the A7S III, even compared to the A7S original, is completely different, right? So the A7S original, this was taken with just moonlight alone, and I really wanted to test that out for my shots here. So we were actually in a full moon at midnight taking the shot. So Gabrielle was kind enough to be the subject here, and this is ISO 8000. That was before it was able to kind of minimize the noise in the corners when I was raising the ISO so high on A7S. But now, with cameras like the A7S III, this shot was taken in 12,800. So there was like no need for me to be worried about pushing the ISO. I could have gone even higher. The algorithm for reducing noise has been incredible, and this is not just limited to the A7S III, but the A7R5, the A7 IV. Anyone coming in with a newer generation of cameras, you're going to see an improvement in terms of how it handles. But the thing with ISO is extremely subjective, and the main thing you need to ask yourself is if this is going to be enough for you and what your output is. If it's for social media, not that big of a deal. No one's going to see the noise, especially since you're outputting in such a low resolution. But if you're printing it and to a gallery, that's when the ISO really matters, because we could really see, we could put our eyes pretty much just like this close to the print, and that's where we're going to be a little bit more, I guess, critical about it. And again, it's very subjective. As long as you're happy with the photographs, then it comes with experience and what you're okay with. But essentially, ISO and ASA, it came from film, and that's why it's called that. Instead of film having larger silver particles that's able to absorb more light, and you saw the grain because of that, in this case, we're increasing the frequency to be more sensitive to light, and what that introduces is frequency noise when you increase it. So if your megapixels are stacked in a tiny little APS-C sensor, which I'll get to over here, if you're including 24 megapixels into an APS-C size sensor, then it's going to create more noise, And that's typically what's going on, and that's why it's more noisy to get those kind of shots in for, like, say, your cell phone. And that's why there's a lot of more improvements when it comes to algorithmically improving noise reduction. And that's a lot of times the case, but sometimes, you know, it's a lot of other things. But sensor size is a big deal, especially when you're comparing something like the A7C series, where it's 24 megapixels or 33 megapixels like I'm using right now. The ZVE10 is 24 megapixels, and it's a smaller sensor. So those are things you just really need to be mindful of. And yeah. So that's pretty much the exposure triangle. And that's where you really need to balance those shots, right? And there's a few things that's going to be happening if you're on auto mode, and it'll kind of explain it. And I'm going to go into that a little bit later, right? So I'm going to move forward, and we're going to go kind of through a quick camera tour. I don't want this to be too long since everyone's cameras might be different, but I do want to kind of explain what some of the buttons are, right? So here we have the hot shoe. That's where you attach things like mics or the or any of the flashes. You have your mode dial over there. The front dial can change a setting. Typically, I believe it's shutter. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason. The rear dial is your aperture. And then you also have your shutter release. You have your mode dial, which will get you to your priorities. And then you have your custom buttons, record buttons, and the exposure compensation dial as well. And I could go deeper into that as we go into customization, which is later into the lesson. Some of the nice things here in the back is your AF on button. That's for back button. And that's for the AF on button, and if you want to do kind of back button autofocusing. And yeah, that's pretty much what it'll do. You don't have to hold that back button if you just like half pressing on the shutter. And then you also have your auto exposure lock, AEL. And then you have your joystick to choose where you want your autofocusing to be if we set it in that way, right? Then we have your function, which brings up a lot more things here, like kind of a quick access to your menus. So if I hit the function button, we could see things that, and we could also customize this in the future. And I'll show that as well.
All right, Robbie, as we go to customize out, we have a request from the crowd. I think you have the intro music possibly playing in the background.
Oh, here, yeah. Let me lower down that volume here real quick. I think I saw something with jazz. I had that play in the background, but I'll reduce that here for us. All right.
Okay, that should help out. And anyone else who's having the issues with screen resolution, just possibly lower the res that you have it coming in. You can always see this in its full resolution glory on the Adorama recording.
Yeah, I would highly suggest if you find the cog button through playback, you could change the quality settings, and you could go to 1080p and 60 frames per second. That should help out. All right. The one thing I wanted to focus on here was the shooting modes. And you have a full slew of a lot of different things. What I like about the newer cameras now, you could actually change the kind of mode from photo, video, and S&Q, and we'll talk about that as well. Auto isn't bad though. I would highly suggest auto if you wanted to go that route. If you really don't feel comfortable with understanding any of the exposure triangles or anything like that, then you could kind of just, you'll get pictures because auto will pretty much take care of everything. Program is when you want to get into more of the customizable buttons. You have access to your function menu, and that's one of the benefits here with program. But it will adjust your ISO, your shutter speed, and aperture for you. But I believe you can take the camera off of ISO auto in program as well. So if you do want to have a little bit more control, you could definitely do it that way. Aperture, as we talked about earlier, will focus primarily on the aperture that you choose, amount of light, how much shallow depth of field you want. So that's a really good one, especially if it's a really bright day. So the main thing here is that on a sunny day, you're going to have plenty of light to work with. So aperture will be your friend, where it'll just set the shutter speed that you need it to be. And 9 times out of 10, it will get the exposure right and the aperture that you want, the depth of field that you want. So I suggest aperture if you're out during the day. But at night, I personally like to go into shutter priority. And that way I can get the shutter speed, and aperture and ISO will do its thing on its own. That way I know that the pictures will be sharp if I'm trying to catch capture candid photography. So I'll set it to 1/250th of a second on shutter priority, and then the camera will do everything else, right? Moving forward, we have manual, and that's where you have complete control of your function menu, your other any other side settings that you have, subject recognition, and you also have full control of your exposure triangle. So that's a good one if you feel more confident about the exposure triangle. And that one definitely, the best thing about this is that your cameras are able to see, you're able to see the exposure from the camera. That's one of the best benefits of mirrorless. And so you'll know if it's going to be too dark or too bright. But yeah, you have pretty much full control of how much time you capture, your ISO settings, and your aperture as well, which is great. And memory recall is really solid if you have a lot of things that you do for work or anything else like that. I highly suggest looking into memory recall. If we have time at the end, I'll show you how to set up memory recall, because I use it for everything, for photography, videography. If I need to set it up for, if I'm just recording for social media, it's really cool to just go to a mode, a memory recall mode, and everything's pretty much set. But essentially, you set up the camera, you register it for memory recall, and then it goes into that mode, and it'll go back to exactly where it was when you started, right? All right. So next we're going to go into movie. For some cameras like the A7 IV, A7R5, A9 III, you're able to just change the mode itself. The ZVE1 as well. There's a few other cameras that have it where there's a mode. You don't need to just go and rotate from the mode dial, where you actually have a sub, I guess, lever where you could choose to movie mode. And S&Q here, right? So this is where if you really want to have more control of movie mode, and then the same thing for S&Q. And slow and quick means that you could do time lapses or slow motion video without the need to bring it to the computer and edit it. And that is another key benefit when you're using S&Q. It won't record the audio, but you don't have to compress all the photographs from the time lapse, and then you're not going to use any of the original photographs, especially if you're not going to use any of the original photographs. You could just have a time lapse pretty much done for you right when you end the recording. So definitely check out S&Q and give it a shot. I know a lot of people don't know what S&Q, when I talk to them, it's like, what's S&Q? It means slow and quick. So if you will need to slow down 120 frames per second to 30, it'll automatically slow it down for you. And the same thing for the quick. If you bring it down, you could actually speed up the recording, and it'll do a time lapse, and it'll make it at the settings you need, 4K or anything like that. It'll pretty much just do it for you automatically. All right. So next I want to talk about scenes, and this is where it's automatic, but it's kind of you set the scene that you want, right? So we talked about shutter speed, aperture, and everything else. What this means is that it's going to be, you're giving the computer less guesswork to figure out what the camera settings are. So sports mode means it's going to prioritize shutter speed. Portrait mode is going to prioritize aperture. So those are the main things when you choose your scene modes. So that's something to keep in mind of, especially if you're not like a person who wants to tinker and just wants to capture the moment. Then I highly suggest going to scene mode as well. Cool. All right, Jason, do we have any questions?
We do have some questions that have been coming in. Most of them are on resolution. So just a reminder for everyone, just make sure your res is lowered a little bit. You'll be able to see this in the full 1080 60p on the recording. And I've seen a few people saying that, everything across the board. So if you've already done that, try just a refresh on your browser. That might be the case as well. And we will be taking more questions at the end as well. I believe Robbie has some more things on firmware updates. We will get into the memory recall. So we'll keep chugging along on here.
Cool. Sounds good. All right. So one thing I wanted to touch on is image quality. And honestly, I would prefer if you went to RAW plus JPEG. Pretty much the main benefit is that you have both. Right, but if you're looking to save space, then JPEG will be fine. But yeah, you just get more detail when you're working with a RAW, And it's not to say that you need a program, because we do have our Imaging Edge desktop where you can edit from that program for free if you don't have the software. But essentially you have full control, even your white balance. Even if that was off, then you can always go back and work on it and make sure that it works clearly. And here's one of the main things that blew me away with the A9 III is that with a raw image, I wouldn't have been able to recover the shadows at all because the blacks would be blacks. And now that's kind of one of the main issues here, right? So with editing a raw image, I was able to bring back the shadows, and I was able to get the exposure pretty much back to a proper exposure. And in JPEGs, it just doesn't have enough of that, I guess, latitude to bring back any of that detail. And that's one of the main benefits. And that's kind of why I go to RAW. Hive is great. I see you, Philip. And Hive is, it comes down to if you need to give it to someone, the image files or anything like that, and you have to convert it to JPEG for anyone who wants to see it that's outside of Apple. Hopefully, Android could catch up in that situation. But I'm really glad that there is an option there because the compression is great on Hive, and it does, it's able to record or at least capture more detail, not as much as RAW, but it is better compressed, and it captures a decent amount of detail there. Cool. All right, so that's pretty much my topic on RAW plus JPEG. I know there is compressed RAW and uncompressed RAW. There's not much of a difference there. I've heard that there is a one-stop recovery difference when it comes down to compressed RAW, but it's very minute. I feel like a lot of people would not be able to notice. Everything about control, you're still going to be able to see. So I personally will go to compressed RAW just because I can have more photos to take with the camera. So on the A7 IV, we could do that setting here right now and go into image quality. So here we could kind of see for ourselves here, and we go to not this one, but image quality, and go to image quality settings. Uncompressed would leave me with 1765. I believe this is a 160 gigabyte card. And then if I go to lossless compressed, then now we have 2,000, essentially 1,000 more photographs. So definitely something to keep in mind. But yeah, let's go back to the presentation. Now we go on to focus modes. I think this is a really important one. Once you kind of master or understand your exposure triangle, understanding your focusing modes is going to be important, as well as focusing areas just as important. And we're going to go over that as well. You have your autofocus out of the box. Your camera's going to be set at autofocus A. And you could find that here if you hit function on your camera, right? That's going to be autofocus A, which is automatic autofocusing, right? And if you go to autofocus single, it'll only focus once. And if the subject moves, then it's kind of going to be out of focus. So with human beings or anything that's organic that moves, it's not going to be good. But I think with a lot of the modern cameras now, you could just leave it at autofocus continuous, because it will focus on whatever the rules set for the focusing area. So it'll adjust and move along with the camera. So even if the subject moves, it's going to be able to react to it. And Sony is known for their autofocusing, and I think you could really rely on it. Even with the A7 III and the A7, like a lot of the cameras with the A9, when the A9 was introduced, really, that's when the autofocusing kind of flipped the switch and made mirrorless full frame cameras really just amazing. Even the APS-C guys as well. So that's the difference between autofocus continuous and autofocus single, between autofocus auto. But I would highly suggest getting out of autofocus auto if you just got it out of the box, and go towards the autofocus continuous. So as I said, autofocus continuous is set, but there's a lot of different rules when it comes down to it. So you have your focusing areas, right? So here we have wide, zone, center, flexible, spot, and we'll kind of discuss about what's going on here, right? So with wide, it's going to prioritize whatever is closest, and it's also going to utilize the whole frame essentially, right? So up to 90% plus of the frame, which is great. If you have the A7 III to end up, it's typically going to be more than 90% of the frame will be in focus. If it gets out of that edge, whatever is closest, it might fall off. And we can kind of see that here. Let me get the exposure right and reduce the shutter speed. But I have it set on wide right now, and you could see that if I go all the way out here, it's still in focus, probably until I get, yeah, it's still there. It's very hard for it to be out of focus, but you'll see that it's working to capture whatever's closest to the camera. If I put, let's say, this box in front of it, it'll prioritize whatever's closest. So that way you'll know that it is, working, and it'll only prioritize whatever's closest to it. Let's go forward here. And with the smaller ones, so something like zone, it's able to use a smaller space, but it's still working within that kind of area. Focusing, like if you were set on wide and just scrunch it down to a smaller size, then it's still going to work the same way. It's going to prioritize whatever's closest. Center will be prioritizing only what's in the center. So if it's out of focus or out of the center, right, then it'll only prioritize what's there. So here in this situation, the second I get out of the center here, it's going to focus on the cloak behind. So that's just something to keep in mind of when you're in center. So it's great for animal photography, wildlife photography. As long as you kind of treat it like a crosshair, then it's kind of going to have whatever's in the center in focus. So that's something to keep in mind of. All right. Next, you have your flexible spot, and that's when you utilize your joystick. And so in that situation, if you wanted to compose it a certain way, then we can do that. Let's say I have it on a tripod, everything's perfect. I'm using my joystick to move where I want it to be in focus, and it's going to focus and prioritize whatever's in that area. So that's one of the benefits for a flexible spot. You have 3 different sizes, and the joystick, if you are looking for, is right over here. All right. And if you don't have a joystick, you still have access to it. Typically, you're hitting the center button. And this is, I think it works that way out of the box if you do set for focusing points. But typically, if you hit the center button in the back over here, you'll be able to kind of access and reset and use the D-pad on that wheel to choose where you want your autofocusing area to be. But I'm going to leave this up for a second.
And if you own an A7C, that is what you're doing right now. If anyone is an A7C user, one of those drawbacks to the size is there is no joystick toggle, but anything generation 3 or ahead, so that'll be like your A7 IIIs and things of that nature, you will have a joystick toggle. APS-C cameras like 6700, 6400, you'll be using the wheel as well.
Yep, exactly. Thank you, Jason. All right. So that is the main autofocusing areas, but one thing I definitely want to touch up on is tracking, right? It was first introduced in the original A7, A7 II, A7 III series, where it was using 3 algorithms to focus: color, distance, and face. So it kind of got a general area. With the newer cameras, we're seeing more pattern recognition, so pattern eye, and so it's able to track more confidently, right? And now with the newer cameras like the A7R5, the A9 III, the ZVE1, a lot of the cameras, even the A6700, has that AI autofocusing chip where it's not just getting pattern recognition, but facial and subject recognition as well when it comes to trains, cars, butterflies. It'll definitely be able to recognize that as well. So that's definitely, there's always been a constant improvement into it, right? So with the real-time tracking, what it does is it'll be able to find the eye specifically, and with me, I could see my eye being in focus, and if I move forward or behind, it's able to just track my eye even at f1.2. It's extremely shallow for 51.2. That's one of the main benefits with Sony autofocusing, right? And here you could see pretty much a difference, right? So if you set it for wide, we saw the boxes where it generally has in focus, but with tracking on, we can kind of adjust to see where we need it to be. And it also works with tap recognition as well. With my capture device, unfortunately, I won't be able to tap where I want to focus on, but I have tracking center fix here, and that's the main one that I do like. So if I want to focus on the face here, I could recompose the shot, and even if the subject's moving around, if they're moving forward or back, then it's able to kind of pick up and move along, and I could just adjust it where I need it to be and take the shot and compose it exactly the way I need it to. So that's one thing to keep in mind of. Real-time tracking is one of my favorites, and the AI autofocusing chip really is just a advancement in that tracking. So that's one thing to keep in mind of. So it's able to kind of really be sticky and really intelligent, whether it's wildlife or humans. So it's able to keep up.
And if we have any birders who are out there right now watching this, that center real-time tracking that Robbie just demonstrated is excellent for using for when you have birds in flight, because you can start composing the shot but still have them in focus the whole time. Just get them dead center in flight and then just compose as you're shooting.
Yep. The A7 IV was the first camera outside of the A1 that has bird aviary eye autofocus, so it's something to be mindful of. But the AI, anything with the AI autofocusing chip, like the A7R5, ZVE1, A6700, and of course the A9 III, could be able to detect insects and cars. And even if they're wearing a helmet, it's able to recognize that there's torsos, arms, and limbs and everything else. So it's able to recognize that that's a human and will prioritize the person there. All right. Anyone using an older camera or adapting lenses, manual focus is really nice, right? So with the A7S original, I was using a manual focusing lens, and it was just really beneficial to have focus peaking. So here's a quick example of focus peaking at work. You can see that anything that's in red will be able to show what's actually has contrast, has harsh lines, so it's able to show that it's in focus, right? So that's one of the benefits for focus peaking. So definitely turn that on. And the weird thing about manual focus too is that the second you go into manual focus and you rotate the wheel, you'll see that it's automatically zooming you in, so you could make sure everything's in focus. And that's typically for when you're using it for something on a tripod and nothing is moving, right? Now I know that this is definitely in focus. But if you're using an adapted lens, you don't want that to happen. You want it to act as a film camera. So it's in this situation where you want to go into your manual focusing. It's going to be over here in focusing mode. And we're going to go into manual focus assist, because that's exactly what's happening, right? So we're going to go to focus assistant, and we're going to turn off the auto magnifier. And this is really if you want to treat it as a film camera. I'm going to rotate the manual focus lens now. And now it won't be automatically zooming in, right? And we could also set that to be a separate button if I really need to make sure that something's in focus. But anyone adapting lenses and using manual focusing lenses, I highly suggest turning off your manual focus assist. And you could find that here as well for Generation 2 menus as well. All right. And I'm going to breeze through here through what I just demonstrated, because normally I don't have a camera connected. And yeah, turning off the focus magnifier as well.
Yeah, I also turn off the focus magnifier, so I agree with everything Robbie says. However, some people have asked, like, is there a place for this? If you're doing product photography or something continuous, so let's just say you're shooting like a ring and it's always in the same spot in every shot that you've created, or it's baseball cards and you're constantly focusing on like the logo of where it is, that's where magnification, you could have it go over that area. The one important part of the shot, you could always make sure you have it right where it's going to be. But unless you're doing something so consistent where it's the same spot and over, focus, it can be turned off on the magnification. Exactly. Unless your eyes get really, really bad. I think I have another 10 years before I have to turn it on.
There you go. Yeah. And the cool thing about that manual focus assist, you're seeing that orange box. That's actually showing you where it's focused on. So if I wanted to do like rule of thirds here and focus on the eyes, it's always going to be in the center, but I could use the joystick to kind of move it, and I could readjust that, and that way I could just hit the shutter and get the exposure that I needed as well. So keep that in mind when you're using your manual focus assist. All right. Next, Jason, do we have any questions?
We have got a few that are in there, but for what Robbie just demoed, Philip, you could see on there how he was able to use the toggle. That's the kind of motion where you could do it just like one square at a time. So if you were in, say, flexible spot, small, it's going to move a lot of squares in small increments. If you're on something like zone, there's only 3 clicks you could really do going across. So it's all like kind of depending on that focusing area that you would be working with. Reminder, we've seen some success on here. If anyone else is having resolution issues, we've had some people refresh. It's been coming in fine. We do apologize for that. Maybe we'll lower the res, but we wanted to make sure, Robbie and I, that when you view the recording, optimal resolution will be there after the fact.
Yeah,
So in some
reviewing, yeah.
cases, if you see a timestamp, we'll try to put some highlights in the descriptions. But if you're like, hey, it was at this time during the broadcast, you'll be able to see the high resolution of what we were going through there.
Yep.
In addition, Gary, to your questions there, we'll throw this out to you, Robbie. Gary's shooting some sports. He's got, some things with indoor swimming as well as some nighttime football. There's a lot of advantages to a full frame sensor. In this case, that'll come with the light gathering that's in there, but a stacked sensor is just going to do very well for that kind of speed shooting. So that's something you can look into. Still do fine with even an A7 IV or some other full frames. All are really, you can't really go wrong with any situation that you're going into. These cameras can do it, just some can do better than others.
Yeah.
That's why Rob even mentioned for low light, S3. It hits it out of the park. Would I go out and shoot portraits with it? I could, but I'd have some other choices first. So you can't go wrong. That's why it's great that Adorama has all of these available for purchase as well as in their rental department. So it's something where you can always try some of these things out and see how they do for you.
Exactly. And I've worked with for boxing or something like that. I brought the A7S III with me, and I also brought the A1. And I like the performance of the A7S III. It was really loud, so I didn't need to have a silent shutter. So that's where the benefit was. I also couldn't crop as well. So that was another loss. But having both of those bodies, if you can have both bodies, the A7S III was really great for getting the low light for those situations, and as a secondary body. But the A1 was great because I just slapped the 24-70 f2.8 version 2 on there, and I was able to crop in if I needed to get tighter in terms of detail, and I knew that the focusing was going to be on there, so I was able to kind of flex and be flexible around that situation. So it really comes down to what your needs are. Cool. Anything else, Jason?
I believe Adorama will have this video up on their page, so that's something you'll be able to see.
Yeah, it'll be in the Adorama events page. So if you haven't subscribed, definitely subscribe in the bottom there, and then you'll be able to see it there. And if you refresh this in about 5 minutes, YouTube's pretty fast about processing these live streams. Awesome.
Yeah, they'll get up. There's the downside of having Robbie and I live. There's a slight change in the resolution, but then we're immortalized in beautiful 60p.
Yep. But so I'm gonna move forward with the thing. I'm just gonna breeze through it, and I really do want to focus on the questions that we had. So we're gonna go quickly through and show you exactly what's going on. Okay. All right. So we have the function menu here, and one of the cool things about the function menu, that's your FN button right there, is it's a quick access to any of the kind of customizable settings that you have, whether it's timer, color style, color palette, focusing, autofocusing modes, areas. So you could make this as customizable as you need it to be for Sony cameras. And that's what's one of the cool things, right? With the current generation, we can really adjust and fine tune everything. You'll see exactly what those settings do. The older ones, you kind of had to see that function upper meant that top layer of that box, and then function lower was the lower section of that box. But with the newer ones now, you could kind of just set it to what you need it to be, right? And you could adjust a lot of things here, and that's just gonna be in the camera settings in the toolbox area. So if we go to your menu over here, and we go down to your toolbox, we can go to Operation Customize, and this is where we can change it to be whatever you need it to be. Remember when I said the front wheel is typically shutter speed? If you're more comfortable with that being aperture, we could set that So that's going to be in custom key dial for photography. We have it for video. So if we go here for photography, we could go all the way down here to make it the way we want it to, right? And here we could also, it gives you a map where you're customizing. So pretty much all of these buttons here are all customizable. And now with the A7 IV, that top right one that's typically exposure compensation wheel is now an adjustable wheel. And I set that up for ISO. That way I like to have full control of the exposure triangle, and I fully control all three things with that. So that's one of the nice things about having the newer models, the A7 IV and up, where I could have that kind of flexibility to do so. I already showed you, so I'm going to skip these slides here for the custom button. And now I just wanted to focus on the apps and programs if you guys haven't already. There's a few key programs that we have, and they're all free, which is great. One of the main things if you're using the latest camera equipment is the Creators app, where you can connect your camera. You could actually update your firmware depending on which camera that you have through the Creators app, which is great. The ZVE1 specifically gets 4K 120 if you wanted to, and you could update that through the Creators app. You also have, that's also the hub where you can access and control the camera remotely through your phone, or you could use that to transfer files. With a newer one, we used to have this app called Imaging Edge Mobile, but Creators app, you could actually connect and set the camera to send even though your camera is off. So say it's in the back seat, you could actually turn it on and you could access those files here in your network tab, and you could have it connected to your phone. Since it's connected via Bluetooth, it's already connected directly to your phone, and it doesn't need to pair it individually. And you could actually just set it up where it can access it even though the camera is off. So here in Smartphone Connect, we go to connect while powered off. You turn that on, and now it'll use the pair device, and it'll connect even though the camera is off, and it'll access the files, and you could like pretty much go over the pictures. You could also filter your photos, videos, even proxy files if you don't want to have the large files, if you know what proxy is. And I could go over that in the video class, but you can choose whether you're looking for your RAW files or JPEGs and just transfer it wirelessly, which is really great. Next, we have monitoring control, which is more up for the latest cameras, more video friendly. I want to say maybe the A7C II might also work with the monitoring control app, but essentially you're using that wireless connection to monitor through your phone. So you could use it to control any of the settings, and you could also see exactly what the picture is going to be if you are not in front of the camera or need a bigger screen than what our little mighty 3-inch screen from the camera can do, right? All right, next one is the Imaging Edge desktop, and this is for your computer. So this one, you have all those things that we could do with your phone, but now we have access to control it through our computer. And not only that, if you don't want to purchase like Photoshop or any of those things to edit, like Capture One, the Imaging Edge desktop is a way to edit your RAW files, view your RAW files as well, and you also get to tether to your photographs here through the Imaging Edge desktop. So you have your three things like the remote, the viewer, and edit, and then you could also choose where you want your focusing to be. You could also do stop motion video, where it will actually give you kind of a ghosting effect to take the picture. So if you do a lot of stop motion, then this also will show you how the previous picture was. And then when you take the new picture, that'll be the one in the forefront. And then you also have your viewer where you could look at your RAW files. And then that's also the place where you could edit your RAW images as well, all for free. If you have any of the models not stated in the Creators app, the way to connect to your phone is using the Imaging Edge mobile app. And that's one way to access pretty similarly, but you're not going to have as many quality of life features like filters through JPEG RAW or accessing. Typically, you're not going to be able to access your images while the camera is off. All right. So next, you also have your webcam app, which also uses USB. This was when the pandemic started, so the resolution on it was 570p. And that's with a lot of our older version of our cameras that it's still eligible for. But now the A7C even has the firmware upgrade to get USB streaming, and that gets you output up to 720p. I'm using the A7C II, and that gets you 1080p at 60 frames per second. This camera has been using USB streaming for maybe, I had it connected to my computer for about maybe an 3 hours already, and it hasn't overheated. So if you're using it for live streaming, I highly suggest it. There's a lot of other great options as well if you are planning to use it for live streaming. But definitely look into USB streaming. You can set it up. A lot of the major new cameras like the A9 Mark III is definitely going to have it at 4K 30 for higher resolution to live stream. And also you're going to get it for the A7R5 at 1080p at 60 frames per second. I'm using the A7C II, and I'm at 1080p at 60 frames per second as well. So definitely look into USB streaming as well. But that's pretty much it. I do want to talk about any of the questions that you guys have. I definitely want to tackle that. And now I'm going to bring back Jason with us. Hello, Jason.
Jason's back. I's here.
Oh yeah.
All right. I want to thank everyone for going through with us here in the chat, working with our resolution. We've been doing our best on some of these that have been coming in as far as questions. I know a lot of people submitted some stuff in early, and a lot of that was covered in Robbie's presentation. So I will be going through some of the stuff that we had here again, kind of throwing them up as a quick recap, if you will, because once again, 5 people, same question. So I don't want anyone to think like, hey, we didn't just like, oh, how do you turn a camera on? Robbie and I would answer that, and it would only take 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many ways to turn the camera on. But we appreciate all the additional things that have been put into the chat here as well. And feel free to throw some more in there if I didn't give you an answer to them. And some of the stuff there, like I know, Gary, we were discussing there as far as options for you to shoot with sports. So if there's some more things in there too, because very curious to the lenses you'd be using for that as well. As put in there as well with NT, I just put in there for the creators app that Robbie is going over there. Sometimes you don't see all the cameras listed right out of the gate because some of the newer cameras will have things like full functionality with the app, namely touching on the tablet or the phone, as in touch focus would be like on the back LCD screen. That's for some, but not all cameras. So there is a separate option where you should be able to get the 6700 to list on there.
Yeah, should be able to connect to it with the A67, no problem.
Yeah, it should be there. It's one of those that, and when we talk about our apps, the Creators app is the newest one. That's some great things. The Imaging Edge software, including the Imaging Edge mobile, great stuff there, and especially underrated, really, that desktop software for what it could do. And you can't argue with the price of free. But even going back to as far as some of the stuff with Play Memories, Sony's always making sure there's compatibility, and that even some of our older cameras, there can be a way to have these things work. You might just not get full functionality.
Right.
And for what was noted in there as well, by the way, thank you, Pete, for the kind words. When we announced the A9 III and the 300 GM, we also made an announcement that there will be firmware updates for the Alpha 1 as well as the A7S III. So we are waiting to see what all that will entail. I know that a lot of A1 users, myself included, very anxious to see what'll be there. When that drops, we'll probably have a lot of those things resolved right out of the gate. And with that, I'm going to take a quick look here at some of our other pre-questions that we had coming in. We had from Tayo, wanting to know more of a difference between the mechanical and the electronic shutter and when each is used. Now, we went over a little bit of that, I believe, in the presentation. Robbie, would you care to give some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the difference between really, let me put it up here to Q&A. That way people can know if they're going through the thumbnail that we're talking about the Q&A here.
Yes, the Q&As.
Yes. So the main thing about mechanical shutter and electronic shutter, with mechanical shutter, it's a physical thing that is actually capturing the image to the sensor, right? So there's nothing electronic about it. One of the main things that is introduced with electronic shutter is distortion because it's recording line by line, right? So if I could show you guys here, actually, electronic shutter, if I go over here, because our movement is so fast, it's gonna be able to show you rolling shutter as the photograph is taken. So if I go into electronic shutter here right now, fairly fast shutter speed, and I whip the camera left and right, you're gonna see a distortion that's gonna happen, right? So that's essentially what's gonna happen once I take. Oh, let me get my focusing areas set, and I just. Oh, hold on.
Hmm. Technical of the technical.
There you go. You can see that it's distorted in this photograph, right? And that's one of the main things for electronic shutter. And mechanical shutter is going to have an actual sound to it when I take the picture. And if I whip it left to right like this, there's no distortion, just out of focus because it started that way out of the frame. But here, let's try that one more time. There's no distortion in that shot, even though I whipped it left and right. And that's one of the main benefits for mechanical shutter. Now, what's happening here is that the electronic shutter for the A7 IV is not stacked, right? So that's why it's introducing that kind of distorted rolling shutter effect here in this image. And because it doesn't have enough of a refresh rate to be able to capture the whole frame, it's recording it line by line as I go left to right. So it's recording it as I'm turning left, right? Or turning right in the image. So having a stack sensor like the A1, the A9 series, that they have a sensor behind it to process everything at the same time, essentially. So you really reduce the amount of that rolling shutter effect that you see in this image right here. And that's why you want to choose, right? Mechanical shutter, if it's loud for a boxing match, no one's going to hear the mechanical shutter. But for a wedding or golfing, electronic shutter is kind of something you want. And I know wedding photographers who charge more for having a silent shutter, right? So it won't bother any of the sound for during the wedding, and they add an extra expense towards that, depending if you want that to be one of the features for your wedding package. But so that's one of the benefits for stack sensors, and that's one of the benefits for global shutter with the new A9 III. The A9 III is not recording line by line. The A1, the A9 II, and the A9 original, they're doing it very quickly, so we don't see that rolling shutter effect. But the A9 III is taking every picture at the same time, so it doesn't matter if it's a strobe. It doesn't matter. It's not going to have any of the issues. You're able to use electronic shutter as if it was a mechanical shutter because none of the limitations that we had previously with rolling shutter or silent shutter exist anymore. And that's why we can do strobes at 1/80,000 of a second with the A9 III. I'm very excited to have that kind of technology available to us now. But yeah.
It is the good tech that is out there. In addition, sort of some of the things that we just mentioned there in regards to why a mechanical or an electronic shutter. We had the question coming in, I believe it was Peter. Let me see here. Hang on. Thank you for everyone putting in the questions, by the way.
Absolutely.
This is the stuff Robbie and I live for here. And I just put up, June, the latest firmware updates there. That's where you could go for the A9 II of where it would be. I believe it was I want to say Mr. Fleischman on there. I think it was you, Peter. Yes, it was Peter Fleischman. You mentioned you doing main shooting at a restaurant. And possibly with low light. In some cases, and I wrote down there, hey, there are many options available to you. Robbie went over some of the stuff there early on as far as the difference between, say, a shutter priority, an aperture priority, all the way to manual, even some of the automated modes. Depending on the situation you're in, you're going to kind of be going through on the fly on a few of these. I would definitely recommend continuous focus. I would definitely probably work with an expandable auto ISO at one point, put it in a range you're comfortable with. But depending on the restaurant, you could still have some LEDs possibly coming from a bar area. So silent shutter is the benefit through electronic shutter, but you might pick up some banding. So just kind of stay on your toes. There is no unfortunate, just set it to these following things and you'll be fine. Restaurants have so many variables because now it's, as Robbie mentioned, don't make noise with your shutter in a dinner. You could do that at a boxing match. No one cares. But at a restaurant, it's like, I'm sorry to disrupt your meal. You're hearing me click from far away. Electronic preferred, but there might be a time where you're like, hey, I'm far enough away. I can go to mechanical. not worry about any of the lighting issues.
It might be loud enough in the restaurant, but if it's just you and a few other people, you might want to consider electronic shutter. But I probably lean towards mechanical shutter to see if people get annoyed first and ask for forgiveness. But hopefully you're not snapping too many photographs and kind of know or plan the shots preemptively, and so you could get kind of the restaurant photos. But if you're doing event photography, then hopefully people are, eating a lot of food and hopefully being loud and enjoying themselves. So you could kind of probably hopefully get away with mechanical shutter. It really comes down to that certain situation. I do want to cover the topic of firmware updates as well, because there are a few things. Let's see. I want to take everyone to the website that everyone can go to. And Jason, if you could bring them to the Sony Alpha Universe website.
Sure.
Here. You could go to alphauniverse.com. Let me see if I could just put it in full screen here.
Currently featuring Ken Griffey Jr., who is an excellent individual, having met him at the A93 event.
Awesome. Yeah, but
There's the man. Yeah.
There you go. So here you could see your gear, and you could find firmware updates all the way in the bottom. It really comes down to which camera that you have, but the A7 series you could update through your SD card. The older generation cameras like the A9 II, the A7 III, and a few will use a program to update the firmware. And then there's also the newer cameras that can just use the Creators app to update the firmware, which is nice. But I do like having the SD card being able to update the firmware for the A7 IV. So essentially, let's say we need to update the A7 IV firmware update. We see exactly when it was last updated. And then it'll take us to the website where we need to download that file. And this one specifically, the A7 IV, you need to use the SD card. So you make sure you have an empty SD card into your computer. You download the file. You put that file at the very front, or they call it the root folder for the SD card. And so you'll do that. You pop it into the camera, and all you need to do with the camera is go to your menu, go all the way to your toolbox, and at the very end, we're gonna see version, and that's where you go to update. You're gonna see that this is actually lit as a box where you could actually update your firmware through this way if you have a camera that can use an SD card to update the firmware. So that's one of the things to keep in mind of. Cool.
Okay, hopefully we just heard that sound stopped. We hope the sound still came through. And just depending on those links, you'll see that all of them, they have options for both Windows and Mac users. And just a shout out to fellow Mac users. Sometimes you'll see a window pop up from your Mac OS in the back, just looking for your username, your administrator password, because it's wondering why are you doing something that's, not an iPhone. So if you're ever wondering, like, why is it not executing? I'm clicking a button. Sometimes just look behind your windows. There's a little pop-up. You're just putting in your information there for your Mac OS system. Let me see some of the other things that we've got in here. Gary, good question there on the best flash to use for near the 50,000th of a second. In some cases here, for what the global shutter can do right now on the A9 III, you're no longer harnessed by a specific flash sync speed, and you can open it up to almost anything. On the A1, which was at full frame, you can get a flash sync speed at like 400th of a second and get up to 500th of a second by cropping the sensor in electronic shutter. With the A9 III and the global shutter, it's just pick whatever you want. It can be done. A lot of this is going to come down to what kind of shooting you're going to be doing. And that's going to also be, look at the units. How fast are the capacitors for the recharge? Depending on your light output, you can't keep shooting at a speed where the flash can't keep up. So it could be something as cost effective as like a no-name brand out of nowhere. It could be something as luxurious as Broncolor or Profoto. But the camera will match out its own capabilities, but just know the maximum capabilities of your strobe unit at the same time.
Yeah, it comes down to now the flash is being bottlenecked in terms of how fast it outputs that strobe. So if you go to 1/80,000th of a second, that actually might be faster than the strobe could actually output. So that's one of the benefits, that you can micro adjust your A9 III. and you can choose that setting if you really want to go to 180,000 of a second. I've shot in third-party strobes at 1/4,000 of a second, and there was no issue because it still is in that like kind of pop when the strobe pops off. So even at like 1/8,000 of a second with the A9 III, you're able to capture that no problem. All right, cool.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff here, it's the cameras can do a lot of things, and sometimes Robbie and I wish like we could be available to you guys 24/7, explain the situation. Here's the lighting, here's what's going on. We can always give you suggestions there, but we've always found that sometimes the more you push yourself into these different environments, whether it be a still life or high speed shooting, you do get to learn on the fly. You get to go through some of these things, and that's where using both aperture priority, shutter priority, even going into full control of that exposure triangle through manual, you'll find there's many ways that you'll be like, oh, that's how I can get the shot. It'll help you moving forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, is there any other questions there, Jason?
Let me take a quick look. Most of our stuff in the chat is good. I know some people are saying that it stopped. Hopefully not. But if so, just give it a quick refresh on there. We went through a lot of the firmware stuff. We had some of the stuff there. So Salima, Fred, Dot, Jim, I believe some of these questions you had with the AFC, we went over as well. If there was any, if you're still with us and you wanted to know more, put it through. Rick, what I just said there about the most common settings, I think I just discussed that before. We wish we were there all the time, but there is no one catch-all for everything, really. We do have from Raul favorite settings to shoot fashion, portrait, and editorial. I know that Robbie went over some of his stuff in his presentation there about, using a minimum shutter speed. That helped out a lot to it, but once again, several things to play with there as far as your lenses as well to really make the shot. Carlotta, we went through the A1's customization, and in some cases, make that camera your own. Robbie was showing some of those customizable screens, which you could see on the playback. You want a button to do one thing, change it to be what you want it to be. It can be that simple.
Yep, right over here.
Yep, that's B. And now with some of our newer cameras, even highlighting where it'll be. Just make sure you have it set for customization for stills, because you could also customize for your video. You can customize for your playback. But that's why if you're ever coming from a different brand and you're like, hey, I'm used to this dial doing this. Okay, so let's change it so that dial does this. You don't have to have any more muscle memory changes or anything else like that. Heather had a question about her A7R4's viewfinder. Want to see the millimeters of the focal length. That's something you should be able to change in your display settings. So it should show, but usually only on a power zoom coming through.
Right.
If you're using something standard, you will be able to see the millimeters in your EXIF data on the playback, but not during live unless it's a power zoom.
Yeah, I think the RX 10 series can show, and any of the power zoom, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah, power zooms will be fine on that. Which shout out to our new 1635 f4 power zoom. I love that little guy. Weighs 12 ounces. Let's see. We've got that. We have a request from Corey here about will there be a class on advanced features?
I'm glad that he put that question in, and I would love to throw that in. Because there's some really cool things in the camera. If you have anything, I believe the A7S III and above, if you go and push and hold the menu, right? Push and hold the menu and leave it pressed, and then you push and hold the trash can, it'll bring up your format. So if you needed to quickly access that, then you're able to just delete all the files from that memory card really quickly. All you have to do is push and hold the menu, and then push and hold the trash can, and you have to be from here. So that's a nice little tip there. And if you're in the menu, if you hit function, you could actually cycle through the different tabs through hitting the function button. So those are nice little quick tips, and I do want to get into more advanced in terms of specific situations.
Yeah, it's in this case, this being a basic, and we hope we got a lot of this stuff put together in tonight's presentation to give you guys really a crash course, kind of a hands-on. A lot of people here, it could be you're just, this is the first time you've held a Sony camera. Hopefully, like the terms going through like AFA to AFC and the focusing areas, hopefully that opened up a lot of possibilities for you, seeing what the dials are. And we also realize a lot of you are maybe just picking up your camera again for the first time in a while. So it could be something with an advanced class moving forward. We could give some more things more specific to certain cameras as well, so we can explore deeper into them as well. And we're getting a lot of good questions here in regards to flash, so maybe we'll throw something up there, of which, as you saw in my message there, Gary, hopefully, try not to melt some of those flashes by maxing out with maybe an A9 III. And the best way I can make an analogy to that, because the question was using these high speed flashes with high frame rates, the flash has to recharge to give you that light output. So
Yep.
it's similar to like your memory card. If you use an older memory card, it's struggling to take everything off your buffer. Some capacitors on the higher end flash units, they're there so they can recharge fast enough to give you an output. The camera can always fire, the flash can always fire. You might not get the light output though on them. We are going to do a firmware update to, I believe, our 60RM2. That should work out really well with the A9 III upon its release. I believe that is coming as well.
Absolutely.
And let me see.
Yeah.
And
I see a
if the
comment here from
store-
NT, who said,
Yeah.
you don't need to register your camera to update the firmware, so you're good there, NT. So you could skip the sign in and just download the file, and you could just update your firmware. So that won't be an issue.
Yeah, you could always do it simply as a guest on there.
Mm-hmm.
Sony likes to know, who our users are in many cases, and it's that kind of data that sometimes people are like, hey, why do they need to know what are my interests and stuff? We're trying to better see how we can serve a lot of the people who are using, whether it be APS-C, full frame. And keep in mind as well, we've talked a lot about camera bodies here as well. There are some lenses that get firmware updates. And if any of you have an A7R5, that has 8 stops in body stabilization. It's different than the 5.5 stops that are in a majority of the other cameras. Some of your lenses may be up for firmware updates to maximize on your A7R5.
Yep. Absolutely. Cool.
And I'm seeing, I think that is most of the questions that we've got here. Yes-ish, because once again, we have a lot of questions here, and some of them are all kind of the same. So I apologize if we didn't get any of them up there. And I know there is a slight delay between Robbie and I talking here to each other and how it goes off on YouTube. So we'll give it a little bit of a running time here. But if anyone wants to put in any last-minute questions, you can put them in the chat. And likewise, we're hoping to do some more things. I believe Adorama's already commented on some events coming up in the future. And maybe we'll just randomly put a day up there where you can accost Robbie and I at the Adorama counter, if need be, because we always like seeing you guys in person as well. Nothing better than when we're out there and people walk up to us going, "You're the guys from the internet."
It's always nice to
Which,
say
if
hi.
you've not been on our live streams, we're like, "Yeah, we're on the internet."
Yeah.
With a lot of people wondering, where were they? What were they doing? That's
Yeah.
also us wondering, where were we? What were we
Yep.
doing?
And you guys can typically find me at the Adorama store. Hopefully, I'm typically there at least. I try my best to be there as often as I can to say hi to the folks. And one guy saw the A9 III well before it even came out. So sometimes you'll come across me if you guys are in the city. But we have a few more things coming up, and so you definitely sign up for the Eventbrite for Adorama, as well as their mailing